Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Terri McAdams. The main character in today's story is Terri McAdams, a vibrant and active 22-year-old from Arlington, Texas. Since her teenage years, she enjoyed driving around the neighborhoods in her convertible. She often spent time in the city with friends, listening to music. Terri was a bright and popular cheerleader who always drew attention but remained modest and well-mannered. She deeply loved her sisters, Hopper and Pamela, and shared a close bond with all her relatives. Terri acted as a mentor for her sisters, bridging the gap between them and their mother. She enjoyed dancing with them and even taught them how to drive. Everyone who knew Terri described her as a person who loved life. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in the University of Arkansas. Before completing her degree, she decided to move to Arlington to be with her fiancé, Karen Anderson, who was a few years older and had already graduated. After graduation, she planned to start a career and marry Karen, who proposed to her. Since 1984, local newspapers have been reporting on the murders in the Fort Worth area. During this time, Terri was studying at university and took the threat very seriously. She was genuinely afraid for her life, a concern she shared frequently with Karen and family. To protect herself, Terri made several significant changes. She quit her well-paying job in Irving, where she had to drive every day and return home in the dark. Understanding the potential danger, she decided it wasn't worth the risk of driving at night. Despite being young and energetic, Terri began to live a very cautious lifestyle. She stopped going out at night, avoided parties, and only left her home during the day when accompanied by Karen. She even felt anxious about going grocery shopping and often called her mother multiple times a day to express her fears. Terri was genuinely worried about the situation, especially since the authorities had not yet identified the criminal, leaving the streets of Arlington feeling unsafe. Around the same time, Texas police bodies formed a task force consisting of experienced experts to look into a series of violent crimes and prevent further massacres. They believed that a serial killer, or potentially multiple terrorists, were active in the area. Terri felt particularly anxious because she fit the profile of the victims. They were all attractive, around her age, and lived nearby. It was difficult for her to cope, but Karen provided strong support. She admitted to her mother and sisters that being alone was the most frightening part. To help her feel safer, Karen decided to leave his job and accept a new high-paying position closer to home, though it occasionally required business trips to nearby cities. During her moments of panic, she limited her outings and rushed home after school. For any important tasks, she aimed to handle them early in the morning and always sought someone to accompany her. On the morning of February 13, 1985, the local police station received a disturbing call. An employee responsible for technical maintenance at the residential complex where Terri lived reported that he was unable to gain access to the apartment. When the police arrived, no one answered the door, and they were unable to reach the Terri's relatives. As a result, they decided to speak with local residents. Neighbors confirmed the repairman's account. They also could not contact Terri but reported hearing suspicious noises coming from her apartment. The police then decided to break down the door to enter her apartment. Inside, they discovered a gruesome scene. Terri's body was found in the bedroom on the bed. Terri had been raped and brutally beaten with a blunt object. Based on the condition of her body and the blood evidence, it seemed the crime took place at night or early in the morning before the police were called. Forensic experts quickly arrived at the scene to begin their investigation. It was clear that there had been a struggle and Terri had fought back. They found numerous defensive wounds on her arms and upper body, and her face was severely disfigured from a prolonged beating. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, but the forensic expert believes the attacker did not kill her that way. Instead, she died from a severe head injury. She also suffered brutal rape, but it is unclear whether this occurred before or after her murder. DNA traces were found on her bed linen and underwear, but at that time, it was not possible to identify the owner. The analysis methods were still developing and could not be used in the investigation. Additionally, there were no surveillance cameras or geolocation tracking available. The situation became more complicated when local people learned about the tragedy and needed psychological support. The robbery theory was quickly dismissed as many valuables were still intact in the apartment, including conspicuous items. It was clear that robbery was not the motive. The police began interviewing Terri's friends and relatives, looking for people who might have had personal motives such as jealousy, hatred, or revenge. However, Terri McAdams was known to be very kind, friendly, and non-confrontational, and none of her relatives could think of anyone who would want to harm her. Police searched the crime scene but did not find the murder weapon, which forensic experts believe was a hammer or a similar metal tool. They did discover a cigarette butt in the apartment, indicating it likely belonged to the killer. Unfortunately, the technology available at the time was insufficient to extract DNA from the cigarette, and the saliva remnants were too small to analyze. The only useful information obtained was the brand of cigarettes the killer used. One theory being considered is that a serial killer may be responsible for the crimes. Police have looked into Terri's murder and other cases in the nearby area and believe the suspect may not have known the victims, and the attacks appear to have occurred spontaneously. The attacker aimed to avoid detection and leave no evidence behind. So he chose to enter through the back sliding balcony door instead of the main entrance. There were no clear signs of a break-in on the outer window frame. It is probable that he used a tree, growing a few meters away from the apartment building's wall, to reach the balcony. Unfortunately, aside from these basic observations, police were unable to gather any useful information. Police spoke with the family of the Terri, particularly her mother and sisters, who had the closest bond with her. They were all understandably shocked by the tragedy. Terri, known for her cheerful demeanor, seemed incapable of having enemies, especially ones who would wish to harm her so cruelly. Disturbingly, it appeared that Terri had a sense of impending danger. She was afraid to leave her home, fearing she could become a victim. Tragically, she was killed in her own apartment. As news of the attack spread throughout the city, the local community began to believe that there was a killer on the loose, capable of breaking into any apartment. They suspected that he might have targeted attractive women, stalked them, and attacked them. Ultimately, the community felt that no one was safe, especially young women who might be the next targets. Residents decided to take matters into their own hands. Over the next few months, gun and ammunition sales skyrocketed as more people began arming themselves. Meanwhile, public pressure began to mount on the police for answers. The county sheriff appeared on a local television station, asking anyone with information about the crime to come forward. After Terri's murder was reported on the local news, police received numerous calls, but the information did not help the investigation. Initially, Terri's fiancé Karen was considered the prime suspect, but he was away on business at the time and had an alibi. The police tried to include him in the murder profile to close the case and appease public concern, but this was not possible. Terri's friends could not believe that he could commit such a crime. After his alibi of being away on business was confirmed, he was removed from the suspect list. Police spoke with Terri's relatives to reconstruct a timeline of events that took place on February 12. Terri arrived at school around 4 p.m. After leaving the university, she got into her car and drove home. Once home, she changed clothes and went shopping, again alone. Although she usually liked to invite her friends along, they were all busy that day. First, she went to the nearest grocery store to buy ingredients for a cake she planned to make for Karen to celebrate Valentine's Day. He was scheduled to return from a business trip the next morning. Store employees confirmed that they saw Terri at the checkout and even provided a receipt for her purchase. The receipt confirmed that she had purchased ingredients for baking. They determined that she left the store at around 6:30 p.m. Police questioned anyone who may have seen her at the time, looking for any suspicious behavior, such as someone following her. However, no one reported anything unusual. It appeared to be a routine shopping trip. Terri paid for her items and walked out. Terri went home and decided not to go out again, as she had scheduled a visit from a repairman the next morning to fix some wiring issues. That evening, none of the neighbors were home, and those who did hear strange noises were unable to fully grasp the seriousness of the situation. The sounds faded relatively quickly, leading people to calm down. Typically, police would look for the killer among the victim's close acquaintances. However, this time it wasn't the case. A few months ago, Terri was preparing for her wedding. Karen had given her a $5,000 engagement ring, but the police were unable to find the ring during their investigation. Initially, it was thought that the ring's disappearance could be a robbery gone wrong. However, further investigation revealed that this theory was unlikely, as nothing else was missing. Given its value, a campaign was launched to find the ring. Approximately 250 flyers with a picture of the ring were distributed to local pawn shops, including those in Fort Worth and Dallas, informing them of the missing jewelry. Despite this effort, no one reported the ring to the police. The police followed up on all potential leads, but none of them came to fruition. All of the suspects questioned provided alibis. The police focused on people with a history of violence who lived in the area. However, the investigation began to stall. Terri's relatives made efforts to promote the case. They regularly reached out to the public through various media channels. They appeared on TV and radio and distributed many flyers, but their efforts yielded no results. Eventually, the murder of Terri McAdams became an unsolved case that was filed in the archives. The Terri's family continued to seek justice, but the police lacked the necessary resources and evidence to advance the investigation. The case went cold for 36 years until 2021, when a team of experienced police and forensic experts was assembled to revisit forgotten cases. Utilizing new technologies. Among these cases is that of Terri McAdams. Police used advanced DNA testing methods, allowing them to re-examine old evidence. Biological material from the perpetrator was found on Terri's underwear and bed sheets. She fought back during the attack, leaving traces of the perpetrator's skin under her fingernails. A cigarette was taken from the archives and sent for testing because the killer's saliva might be on it. This thorough analysis helped create a profile of a likely suspect. However, when this profile was checked against the database of known offenders, there were no matches. Terri's family hoped to find the killer who had been on the run for decades. Unfortunately, despite their hopes, the case remained unsolved for many more years. Fortunately, the investigation continued and eventually decided to use a new method, genetic genealogy technology, which required the assistance of the FBI. In August 2023, after exploring all possible options, the police department reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigations in Dallas for help with the Terri McAdams case. They planned to analyze the DNA samples collected from the crime scene and the victim's body. This genetic testing aimed to create a family tree of the suspect, allowing the investigation to extend beyond the existing database, which only included known offenders. By using genealogical research, police could significantly increase the chances of identifying the suspect's relatives, particularly close ones. This method is considered very effective. At the time this study was conducted, the database had grown to the point where the probability of finding a match was close to 100%. The investigation was successful in identifying a man named Bernard Sharp, an American who had a notable history with the police in the 1980s. At the time of the crime, Bernard was 30 years old and married. He was also a neighbor of Terri, and Karen had a close relationship with him. During the investigation following the arrest, Bernard contacted the police and supported the victim's family. He provided an alibi that the police initially found suspicious, however. His wife later confirmed his alibi, leading to him being cleared of suspicion. Ultimately, all suspicions against him were cleared and the investigation continued without results. On the evening of November 3, 1985, a man called the police, claiming to be Bernard's wife's brother. He reported that he had been shot and needed assistance. After investigating, the police discovered that an armed criminal had attacked him, his sister, and her friend at their home. When the police arrived at the scene, it appeared to be a horrific massacre. He recounted that when he returned home with his sister and her friend, he found Bernard waiting for them with a gun. Bernard opened fire, killing the two women on the spot and wounding Bernard's wife's brother. Bernard's wife's brother was injured in the shooting but escaped to a neighbor's house. His injuries were not life-threatening. Bernard may not have expected his wife's brother to be there, and the shooting may have been premeditated. When Bernard realized his plan had failed, he began shooting at people. In addition to the two dead women, Bernard's wife's brother was also found wounded at the scene. Bernard was shot in the head and died from his injuries on November 3, 2008. Probably, the decision to voluntarily end his life was a factor in the tragic events that unfolded. It is now clear why the attacks on young girls in the city stopped after this tragedy. Bernard was a serial killer. During the investigation, no witnesses came forward to confirm his plans or his connection to the murders of Terri and the other girls. However, several close friends of Bernard's reported that he knew Terri's killer but did not name him. Several months after Terri's murder, Bernard was found dead after killing his wife and her friend, and seriously injuring his wife's brother. Police were unable to locate his body for an autopsy, so they had to take other measures to determine his connection to the murder of Terri McAdams. Police traveled out of state to meet with one of Bernard's registered relatives. Although the man did not want his name linked to the crime, he eventually agreed to provide a DNA sample. Forensic genealogy helped confirm Bernard's guilt. At the time of Bernard's death, police were unable to compare his DNA with the DNA found at the crime scene. They were unable to establish a connection between his previous attacks. Before killing his relatives, Bernard had only used violence and had not used a gun. Furthermore, Bernard's fingerprints were not in the police database, meaning that no matches could be found. Given the nature of the attacks, police suspect he may have been involved in other crimes in his neighborhood. He appears to fit the profile of a serial rapist and murderer. Bernard's criminal record has been turned over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an agency known for its crime-solving abilities. However, there has been no confirmed evidence of his involvement in any other cases. For Terri's family, identifying the killer brought them relief. After 39 years, the case was finally closed. This breakthrough was made possible by new technology. Terri's sisters appeared on a local television channel and shared their feelings about the case being solved through several interviews. After nearly 40 years, they say it would have been better to see justice in person. However, they take comfort in knowing that this dangerous criminal stopped his criminal ways long ago and cannot harm anyone again. If he had not stopped, many more innocent women could have been victimized by him over the years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Tiffany Crawford. At 11 p.m. on May 2, 2017, 37-year-old Jason Crawford called 911. He reported that he was outside his home and that his wife, Tiffany, appeared lifeless in the car. When the ambulance arrived, they found a woman sitting in the driver's seat of her SUV. She slumped over and unresponsive. As they opened the door and checked for a pulse, a pink pistol fell to the floor of the car. Unfortunately, the woman could not be saved. The police discovered she had 2 gunshot wounds to her head, one on the left side of her jaw and another in her temple. Jason explained that he was at home during the incident. After an argument with his wife, Tiffany, he had forced her to leave the house. As she left, she told him she loved him. Shortly afterward, he heard a gunshot, her scream, and then another gunshot. He rushed outside, saw the tragic scene, and called for help. A police officer believed she ended her own life. But other officers had doubts and many questions. Tiffany was a very positive person and loved children very much. At the time of her death, she had 2 children, a son who was 5 years old and a daughter who was 4. She was a teacher and worked in that profession before having her children. At one point, she raised her children herself and understands the difficulties single mothers face. This led her to create a social media group called Mothers Helping Mothers. The group quickly gained popularity, amassing over 9,000 members who actively supported one another. The organization has become a place where people share experiences and receive support during difficult times. Tiffany had been married for over 6 years, and it was her second marriage. Her first marriage did not go well. Her second husband, Jason, had also been divorced for several years before they married. When Tiffany met Jason, she and her first husband were separated and in the process of divorcing. Tiffany and Jason began dating after her divorce was finalized. She was known for being cheerful and sociable. Those who knew her could not believe that she could end her own life. But she doesn't have any enemies either. After Tiffany's death, the police discovered that Jason was the son of a manager in the sheriff's department. Rhonda Crawford, his mother, informed Tiffany's mother about the incident. Due to Jason's connections to the police, the investigation was conducted very carefully to avoid a conflict of interest. Police suspect a violent death has occurred, so they need to thoroughly inspect the car where Tiffany was found. Consequently, the car was confiscated and inspected, and the area around it was scrutinized, but they didn't find any clues. An autopsy was needed to determine if Tiffany could have shot herself twice. The police continued their work at the scene after the medics departed. However, by morning, the sheriff decided to transfer the case to the Alabama Bureau of Investigation due to the conflict of interest. The new investigators needed to reconstruct the incident from the beginning and EED the SUV to find evidence. A warrant was obtained to search the vehicle, but when an officer went to the sheriff's office, they found out that the car had already been returned to Tiffany's family and Jason was using it. When an officer arrived at Jason's house, he found that the SUV had been thoroughly cleaned, and the interior was shining. Although less than 24 hours had passed since Tiffany's death, important evidence was lost. However, the lab was able to examine the car and take several photographs. For unknown reasons, the vehicle was returned to Jason, as if the possibility of murder was not considered. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the officers were interested in the conversation that occurred between him and Tiffany on that tragic night. Jason mentioned that Tiffany has become very distant from him in recent months. He noticed changes in her behavior, which he attributed to alcohol. According to Jason, she was consuming 2 or 3 bottles of strong alcohol each week and was involved with a support group for mothers. Meanwhile, their marriage was falling apart. At the same time, experts are analyzing the bullet's flight path and studying the possibility that Tiffany shot herself twice. The first shot struck the left side of her chin, and the second hit her left temple, with the weapon falling from her left hand. However, Tiffany was right-handed. It is very uncommon for police to encounter cases where a victim inflicts fatal injuries on themselves, especially using their non-dominant hand. This was the first time they had seen such a scenario. All the circumstances were very confusing, which made the investigation take a long time. Police accessed Jason and Tiffany's social media and computers. Then, they found several important messages. Just a few hours before the incident, Jason discovered Tiffany's messages with another man on the computer. This may make him angry, and maybe he killed her, making him a suspect. Then, Jason admitted he knew about the messages and was angry, leading to an argument. He met his wife at the door and refused to let her in. Their conversation lasted about an hour, during which she asked to collect her clothes. Jason slammed the door and went to gather her belongings. According to Jason, moments later, he heard a gunshot, a scream, and then another gunshot. After interviewing Tiffany's relatives and friends, the police discovered that her mother and friends knew about her extramarital affair. It was revealed that she intended to leave Jason because they often quarrel and have conflicts. They had been facing issues for a while, and it seemed that a divorce was imminent. Tiffany found a job at a grocery store, which allowed her to be financially independent and not dependent on her husband. She did not want her husband to find out about her new relationship to avoid hurting him. Long before the incident, she communicated with her mother over the phone, clarifying that she and the other man were just talking and nothing more. She planned to have a serious discussion with her husband, Jason, to talk over all the details of the divorce. Most of Tiffany's relatives and friends do not believe that she ending her own life. They knew that she would not be able to leave her young children behind. However, Jason already knew what had happened, and it involved he. Detectives listened back to the recording of Jason's call to 911, which he made after discovering Tiffany's body. The police noted that he was extremely calm, which was unusual given the circumstances. He didn't seem worried at all. Moreover, when the dispatcher repeatedly asked who had shot he didn't answer any of the questions. Was his silence due to remorse, as if he were the killer? A week after Tiffany's death, the results of the forensic examination were still pending. Nevertheless, the detective decided to question Jason. The officer inquired about the incidents of that evening, revealing new details that Jason had not previously mentioned. The detective suggested a lie detector test, which Jason agreed to take. During the test, he was asked directly if he had shot his wife. He denied shooting her, ended the interrogation, and left. The police did not detain him, but the lie detector test was automatically considered a failure. The forensic examination took longer than expected because of some contentious issues, and there wasn't enough evidence to charge Jason. However, there was enough reason to classify the case as a murder. No one believed that Tiffany had ending her own life. It took nearly a year for Jason to face a jury. For the relatives and friends of the Crawfords, this period was extremely difficult. No one could have imagined that Tiffany would ending her own life, especially twice. However, Jason was such a wonderful person that it seemed impossible to suspect him of such a cold-blooded murder. During the year-long investigation, Tiffany's relatives continued to communicate and maintain relations with the Crawfords. Nevertheless, investigators had a different perspective, as the autopsy confirmed that Tiffany was murdered. The first wound paralyzed her, so it was impossible for her to fire a second shot. It appeared that the second shot was meant to finish her off. Jason was arrested on May 21, 2018, but was in custody for only half an hour, then, he being released on a $100,000 bail. Law enforcement officials noted that he appeared unworried, remaining confident and calm. The defense argued that no traces of gunfire or blood were found on Jason's clothes. However, the police did not conduct these tests because they initially believed Tiffany had ending her own life. The house was not searched. If searched, it might have revealed Jason's involvement in the case. Their eldest son hesitantly said he heard his father, Jason, enter the house before the first shot was fired. The prosecution argued for Jason's guilt, pointing to a failed lie detector test. However, the defense countered that lie detector tests are not 100% accurate and have a significant margin of error. Forensic experts and police remain convinced that he is guilty. His calm demeanor during the call to 911 was noted, but could not be considered evidence. He explained that he was in shock due to the traumatic sight, which was why he was calm. People react differently in such situations. Forensic experts have good reason to suspect Jason, a gunshot wound on the left side of Tiffany's head. There were no gunpowder particles or abrasions around the wound, which typically occur from the shock wave when a gun is fired at close range. These traces vanish at distances over 25 centimeters, making it nearly impossible for her to inflict the wound on herself without assistance, especially in the confined space of a car. Moreover, the trigger was pulled with the left hand while the car door was closed. Even if she had turned around in the car, there wouldn't have been enough space for such a movement. When detectives arrived at the scene that night, the driver's side door was closed. There was no blood or gunpowder on the glass, suggesting the door was open during the shooting. These inconsistencies imply that the killer was nearby when the incident occurred. The killer likely shot Tiffany with the door open, placed the gun in her hand, closed the car door, and the gun then fell from her hand. Despite this evidences, Tiffany's mother continued to support Jason. In an interview, she expressed that she still trusts him, emphasizing that he is a decent man. The first trial ended without a verdict because the jury could not agree on Jason's guilt. The reason is the lack of evidence such as fingerprints, DNA, or security camera footage. More than 4 years have passed since that tragic night. In the second trial, which included a new independent forensic expert, the expert supported the theory that Tiffany ending her own life. In November 2022, Jason appeared in court again, he facing charges of first-degree murder. He still had the support of Tiffany's mother, although she did not want to attend court to hear accusations she believed were false. Despite her reluctance, she was compelled to testify as the prosecution's first witness. The prosecution highlighted Jason's history of being wronged, noting that his first wife had cheated on him, severely damaging his honor, and that his second wife, Tiffany, was also in contact with another man. Police discovered a recording of a call Jason made the evening before the murder, indicating he was extremely upset. However, Jason claimed he did not remember this conversation. He also continued to have a friendly relationship with his first wife. Experts collected DNA to test the gun. They found a man's fingerprints on the gun. However, the fingerprints were too minimal to identify anyone, which raised further questions. It appeared the weapon had been wiped clean before it ended up in Tiffany's hand. The prosecutor stated that the main motive for the murder was anger over Tiffany's extramarital affair. The prosecution argued that the weapon was 25 centimeters from her head. However, an independent forensic expert countered these arguments. He explained that Tiffany's thick hair could have absorbed the impact and dispersed traces of gunpowder and blood. Therefore, the weapon might have been closer but didn't leave any clear traces. Friends provided key information, confirming that Tiffany had been drinking heavily. It was also revealed that she was seen as a psychologist before these incidents to address emotional issues. After 4 days, the case went to the grand jury. They deliberated for over 2 hours and then asked to see the recording of Jason's conversation with the 911 dispatcher. The jury noted that when Jason was asked where the pistol was, he said it was lying next to Tiffany, but the pistol was actually in his hand when the police and medics arrived. Based on this inconsistency, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Although Jason claimed he might have misspoken, but Tiffany's mother turned away from her once beloved son-in-law. Jason Crawford received a 99-year prison sentence but will be eligible for parole after 15 years. His expected release date is November 16, 2121, but he can apply for parole in 2038. Jason plans to appeal the verdict. The children of he and Tiffany currently live with Jason's parents. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Corey Richens. The death of a loved one is a devastating tragedy that deeply impacts family members and children. Each person handles the loss in their own way, trying to deal with the blow of fate. To cope with this shock, Kouri Richins, a woman, wrote an entire book. It seemed that she, more than anyone else, understood the depth of what happened. However, as the police delved deeper into the tragic death of a man from Utah, it became increasingly clear that there was more cynicism. Eric Richins was born in 1982 as the eldest of 3 children, with 2 younger sisters, Katie and Amy. He shared a special bond with Katie. The family lived in Summit County, Utah, where they were well known and wealthy, thanks to their cattle ranch. Many buildings in the town still bear the family's last name. Despite their prominence, the Eric were humble and kind, and they were respected by everyone who knew them. Eric grew up on his parents' farm, where he participated in sports and helped with chores. His family was part of the Mormon Church, and religion played a major role in Eric's life. He spent 2 years on a mission trip to Mexico City, where he demonstrated good character by helping the community. Upon his return, Eric attended the University of Utah, where he earned a bachelor's degree in international law. During this period, Eric began dating Julia Jurgensen. They married when Eric was just 20 years old. However, due to their youth and desire for independence, they couldn't maintain the marriage and decided to divorce. After his studies and the failed marriage, Eric saw promising opportunities to start a construction business, which he began to pursue. Eric frequently visited the Home Depot store, where he enjoyed chatting with the cashiers while waiting for his order. During his visits, he noticed a charming cashier named Kouri, who was widely considered one of the most beautiful women in town. Eric was captivated by her beauty and secretly in love with her. But he hesitated to ask her out because he was still dealing with the emotional and financial fallout from his difficult divorce. Eric's celibacy continued for a while, but eventually, he asked Kouri out, and she agreed. Their first date was filled with laughter and fun. They got along well, and their relationship developed quickly. The couple was truly happy despite their significant difference in social status. Eric was always cheerful and sociable, able to cheer her up on Kouri's worst days. Despite the shock from his first marriage, Eric quickly realized that Kouri was the one for him and soon proposed. She accepted, and after a whirlwind romance, they got married in 2013. Kouri was not only beautiful but also intelligent. She attended her chosen university and earned a bachelor's degree in health management, followed by a master's degree. Kouri had previously worked as an administrator at a design agency before meeting Eric in a hardware store. Kouri became a new ray of light and hope for him, giving him confidence that he could build a loving family. Kouri was born in 1990 in an ordinary family. Kouri has an older brother and an older sister. Her father died at the age of 57 in 2010 after struggling with alcoholism. He was unable to witness Kouri's wedding, which took place 3 years after his death. Before the wedding, Eric's mother insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect her son from experiencing another shock like his previous divorce. At that time, Eric's business share was worth about $2.5 million. His mother presented the agreement as a precaution in case of divorce. According to the prenup, Kouri could not claim Eric's money, and he could not claim hers. Eric arranged for Kouri and partner Cody to be the beneficiaries on his life insurance policy. In the event of his death, Cody could use his portion of the insurance payout to buy out Eric's share of their business. After their wedding, Eric and Kouri began their ideal life together. They bought their home, lived happily, and hoped to have children. Inspired by her successful brother who had made a fortune buying, renovating, and selling houses, Kouri decided to follow the same path. With Eric's experience in the construction industry, Kouri obtained her real estate broker's license and began selling real estate. Her friendly nature and attractive appearance quickly made her a well-known real estate broker in town, which made Eric proud. Eventually, Curry shared her brother's business model with Eric and they began working together. Curry identified profitable properties for resale, Eric managed the renovations, and they sold the homes. Their business flourished until a couple sued Curry for failing to disclose the true condition of a home. The lawsuit was settled out of court and did not affect their business. After 9 years of marriage, they have 3 sons, Weston, Carter, and Ashton. Despite his busy work schedule, Eric values family time, being actively involved in his sons' lives and supporting them in sports. Since 2020, things have been unusual in their relationship. While on vacation in Greece, Eric called younger sister Amy and said Curry had given him a drink that made him feel sick. He suspected she was trying to poison him and warned that if he suddenly died, Curry would be responsible. Although the family was concerned, they dismissed Eric's claims as paranoid because the couple seemed happy. After the vacation, Eric secretly changed his will in November 2020, leaving his business shares and assets to younger sister Katie without telling Curry. The couple continued to live together for another 1.5 years until early 2022. This time, the conflict was over Curry's desire to buy an unfinished mansion for $2 million, which she thought could be sold for $5 million after renovations. Eric is skeptical about the deal's profitability, causing tension between them. Curry accuses Eric of controlling her business, while he believes the investment is too risky. Around this time, Cody, Eric's business partner, was notified by the insurance company that Curry had tried to change the beneficiary on Eric's life insurance policy to her name. Although she was unsuccessful, this raised serious concerns about her intentions. Eric started considering divorce, knowing that Curry would lose everything due to their marriage contract. Eric had already transferred his share to younger sister and removed Curry's name from all documents, including the insurance policy. Meanwhile, Curry spent $1,000 on powerful and dangerous painkillers. On Valentine's Day 2022, Eric told Cody that after eating a sandwich Curry made, he suffered severe respiratory irritation, similar to an earlier incident in Greece. Despite his suspicions, Eric did not leave Curry's side or stop eating her food. Eric continued to be suspicious of Curry, especially after he refused to buy the mansion. On the night of March 4th, Eric, 39, was found dead in his bed. The night before, Curry had made Eric a Moscow Mule over dinner. After he finished drinking it, they went to bed. During the night, Curry woke up to comfort one of their sons, who had been having a nightmare. When she returned to the bedroom around 3 a.m., she found Eric cold and unresponsive. She called 911, saying that Eric had no signs of life and that her attempts to resuscitate him had failed. Paramedics confirmed Eric's death, and Curry mentioned that she had attempted CPR on him, but doctors doubted her story. The man was bleeding from his mouth, but his wife had no blood on her. His death appeared to be due to a drug overdose, as tests showed his blood levels were 5 times higher than the lethal dose. When Curry was asked why he was taking such a strong drug, she said she didn't know. Eric's family denied that he had any health problems that would warrant such medication. A review of his medical history revealed that he had not seen a doctor in a long time and that no one had prescribed him this hard-to-get prescription drug. Eric had no history of drug addiction or convictions and was otherwise healthy. Just one day after Eric's death, a dispute broke out between Curry and Katie. Curry discovers that all of her husband's businesses and assets are legally Katie's, leaving Curry with nothing. This revelation caused Curry to become aggressive, and she attacked Katie, leading to the police being called. Unwilling to back down, Curry filed a lawsuit, claiming that the prenuptial agreement had been violated. She argued that her name could not be removed from the will and insurance policy without her consent. Curry asked for her rightful share and $300,000 in attorney's fees. In response, Katie took legal action against Curry, suspecting foul play in her brother's death and accusing Curry of poisoning her brother for financial gain. Police began investigating Eric's death and suspected it was not an accident. Curry was the prime suspect. During the investigation, police requested access to Curry's cell phone. They discovered that messages with Neil, the salesman, had been deleted, but police were able to recover them. Curry said her husband's death was a huge loss for her and was especially difficult for Eric's 3 sons, as he was very important to them. Curry played the role of a grieving, mourning widow to avoid suspicion. Police continued working on the case and found another inconsistency in Curry's testimony. According to her story, she went to her son's room at night without her phone, leaving it charging on the nightstand beside her bed. However, records showed that she was actively using the phone at that time, messaging various people. It was even determined that the phone was in motion, indicating she was walking around the house with it. This information did not match her story. The police questioned Neil, the person who sold the medicine and supplied her with the medicine. He confessed everything. He revealed that she had been experimenting with different drugs, claiming that none of them helped with her severe back pain. Little did Neil know that the drugs had an entirely different purpose. In exchange for testifying against Curry, Neil was not charged. During the investigation, it was discovered that Curry had repeatedly taken out life insurance policies on her husband. Immediately after his death, she contacted the insurance company and received $100,000. The day after her husband died, she hired a locksmith to open his safe and took about $150,000 from it. With Eric gone, there was no one to fund Curry projects, and she was also burdened with significant debts at the time of his death. She owed $190,000 in taxes, $1,847,000 to creditors for a mansion purchase, and another $514,000. Curry then wrote a book called You're With Me with her sons. She wanted a book to help her children cope with the loss of a loved one. So she decided to write it herself. After the book was completed, Curry began appearing on various shows to talk about her book. She said that the death of her husband, Eric, was a shock, and she dedicated the book to him and her children. Sales of the book skyrocketed, becoming widely popular within a few weeks. Many mothers bought it to help their children cope with the loss of a loved one. The book's plot was particularly intriguing. In the story, the husband dies from a brain aneurysm. For the Curry, it was a means to secure financial stability since she was in financial ruin. In the book, Curry seems to imply that she did something to her husband, which seems suspicious. Despite everything, Curry profited from her husband's death, benefiting from insurance payouts and earnings from selling a book. She exploited her children's grief for monetary gain. There were also suspicions that Curry might have killed her husband. Rumors suggested that Curry had an affair during her marriage and wanted to be with this man without losing the affluent lifestyle her husband Eric provided. Divorce would have been financially disadvantageous for Curry, so she allegedly killed her husband to get his money. Another motive was Eric's refusal to finance the purchase of a house. 6 months after her husband Eric died, Curry's family noticed that she was preparing a Pinterest folder with wedding ideas. This confused everyone, since all of her friends and relatives were married and no one was planning a wedding, leading to speculation that Curry might be preparing for her wedding to her lover. On May 8, 2023, 2 months after actively promoting her book, 33-year-old Curry Richens was arrested on charges of first-degree murder with aggravated circumstances. She was also charged with possession of a large amount of a controlled substance. The investigation into her husband Eric's death on May 4, 2022, lasted more than a year. Curry is currently being held without bail pending trial. Curry's neighbors and many family members were shocked and could not believe that she had caused her husband's death. Curry Richens gave numerous interviews, presenting herself as a grieving widow who, even a year after her husband's death, had not yet come to terms with the loss. This strategy helped her gain sympathy from television viewers. The interview was broadcast nationwide, causing a significant public response. Curry received significant support and increased sales of her book. She attempted to defend herself by blaming her late husband for past problems with illegal substances, but this claim has never been verified. The couple's 3 children now live with Eric's family, and temporary custody is with Eric's younger sister, Katie. Curry's book could ultimately be crucial for prosecutors in painting Eric Richen's death as a calculated murder with an elaborate cover-up. The judge has scheduled a pre-trial conference for September 23 for the prosecution and defense to discuss jury selection. A trial date has not yet been set. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jennifer and Nura Jackson. On the night of June 5, 2005, Jennifer Jackson, 39, was found dead at her home in Memphis, Tennessee, United States. The night before, June 4, Jennifer had attended a friend's wedding and returned home around 11:30 p.m. She lived in a house in a prestigious area of Memphis with her 18-year-old daughter, Nura. Their relationship was so close that they were more like best friends than mother and daughter. Jennifer had previously been married to Nazmi Hassan, a captain in the Lebanese army, and they had a daughter when she was 20. However, their marriage did not last and they divorced shortly after Nura was born. Nura remained with her mother and her father did not visit often due to his work that required frequent travel. As a result, Nura grew up without a father. Jennifer worked hard to provide for herself and her daughter, which strengthened her character. She achieved a lot. Bought a house and a car, and made sure her daughter lacked nothing. When Nura turned 16, her father retired early and moved nearby. They became close during this time. Unfortunately, this close relationship did not last long. Just a year later, her father was murdered in his store. The crime scene provided no clues and the case remains unsolved. After this tragedy, Nura changed a lot. She started skipping school, going to parties frequently, rarely coming home, and relying solely on her mother for financial support. Nura's mother, Jennifer, felt frustrated and did not know how to help her daughter. Although she tried to guide Nura, nothing seemed to work. Friends advised Jennifer to wait out this challenging period, saying that such behavior was common among teenagers and that things would eventually improve. Trusting their advice, Jennifer chose to take a step back. However, tensions within the family remain high due to Nura's defiance until a new horrifying event occurs. At approximately 5 a.m. on June 5, 2005, neighbors heard a loud and persistent knocking on the door. They were still asleep, confused as to who could be visiting at such an early hour and worried that something was wrong. The neighbors lived across the street from Jennifer's house. When they opened the door, they found an 18-year-old girl named Nura screaming, saying that someone had broken into their house. The neighbor then took out a gun for protection and followed Nura to Jennifer's house. They entered through the back door. Nura entered first. She rushed to the phone and called 911. She told the police that someone had attacked her mother. While Nura was talking to 911, she gave the neighbor directions to Jennifer's bedroom. When the neighbor entered the room, he found Jennifer lying on the floor at the foot of the bed, covered in blood. She showed no signs of life, and there was a lot of blood in her mouth and on the bed. He hurried to the Jennifer to check her pulse, but she was already cold and there was no way to help her. Realizing she was dead, he went back to tell his wife while Nura was still on the phone with the police. Neighbors later returned to Jennifer's home to support a grieving Nura and keep her company. Paramedics arrived to confirm Jennifer's death, determining that she had been dead for several hours. Forensic experts began examining the crime scene, while police questioned Nura, who may have been the only witness to her mother's attack. Noura said that she came home from the party around 5 in the morning and found someone breaking into the house. Worried about her mother, she quickly ran to Jennifer's bedroom, where she found her unconscious. Noura then ran to a neighbor's house for help, saying that she didn't see anyone in the house. During the investigation of the crime scene, police observed a broken window on the inner door that connects the kitchen to the garage, with shards of glass scattered on the kitchen floor. It appeared that the window had been broken from inside the house rather than outside. All entrance doors were locked with no apparent signs of forced entry. Experts noted that it seemed Jennifer was attacked while sleeping in her bed, leaving her unable to defend herself. The situation appeared staged as a break-in, but there were inconsistencies. The hole in the window was positioned much higher than the door lock, making it impractical for an attacker to reach the door handle and open it. Upon further investigation, the police discovered a second hidden lock near the broken glass, which was easily accessible. This lock, equipped with a concealed hinge on the door frame, could not be seen from outside, indicating that the attacker was familiar with the house. On the kitchen floor, police found bloody boot prints and drops of blood. In the bedroom, blood covered the bed, and Jennifer's body was on the floor, suggesting she was attacked while in bed and then dragged to the floor. The attacker inflicted over 50 wounds on Jennifer's head. There was also a wicker basket present, reminiscent of other crime scenes where criminals cover the victim's face to prevent them from seeing the attacker. The situation seemed suspicious. On the surface, the house appeared affluent, much like the surrounding neighborhood where the victim lived, which could have attracted burglars. However, nothing was stolen. Valuables were clearly visible throughout the house. There was no sign of struggle, and the woman had not been sexually assaulted. So what was the motive? The brutal nature of the attack on Jennifer suggested a personal vendetta. Consequently, police began to investigate her life more closely to identify potential suspects. At the same time, the police searched the area around the house, interviewing neighbors and looking for surveillance cameras that might offer critical evidence. Unfortunately, at that hour, all the nearby residents were still asleep. No one witnessed the attacker or heard anything unusual. Additionally, there were no nearby surveillance cameras to provide any leads. Police learned from Noura that Jennifer had broken up with Mark Irwin shortly before her death. The motive for the murder appeared to be jealousy and resentment, leading police to focus on Mark and bring him in for questioning. During the interview, Mark expressed the pain of the breakup to him, saying that he loved Jennifer and would never hurt her. Mark said that he called Jennifer around midnight to discuss personal matters, hoping to mend their relationship, but she did not answer. Assuming she was asleep, he decided not to bother her and went to bed. Mark mentioned that he stayed at his house that night, which was quite a distance from Jennifer's house, at least an hour-and-a-half drive. Although he lacked a solid alibi, he seemed genuinely distressed and cooperated fully with the investigation, passing a polygraph test. Police also tracked his car and phone, confirming that he did not leave his local area that night. This evidence led to Mark being cleared as a suspect in the murder. Noura said that her mother's second husband, whom Jennifer divorced in 2001, was abusive. He had threatened Jennifer and had once pointed a gun at her mother. Noura suspected that he was involved in her mother's murder. Police investigated this lead but discovered that he had an alibi for the time of the murder. After interviewing Jennifer's relatives, police determined that she had no enemies. Instead, all the evidence pointed to Noura, who had been arguing with her mother recently. Noura may have staged the crime. She may have had a motive to kill her mother to inherit her mother's money. During the investigation, it became clear that Noura was a troubled teenager. She not only had a habit of attending parties but was also frequently smoking marijuana. Noura had a short temper, often displayed aggressive behavior, and would resort to using foul language. She demanded money and, when denied, would resort to physical aggression. Additionally, there was a conflict between Noura and her mother regarding the inheritance from her father. Noura wants to sell the property quickly for cash, while her mother wants to keep it. Police suspect Noura is involved in the crime and have summoned her for questioning. Noura repeated the story she had told earlier. She had attended a party and returned home around 5 in the morning to find her mother brutally murdered. She claimed she had nothing to do with the crime. However, the police soon realized that her story was not entirely accurate. After checking her bank card activity and surveillance camera footage from her car, they discovered that at 4 in the morning, she had stopped at a 24-hour store to buy a first aid kit. The kit was later found in her car, but Noura had not reported it. Forensic experts determined that her mother's time of death was between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. A review of Noura's phone records showed that she was at her mother's house at the time of the murder, with details that matched the timeline perfectly. In addition, Noura had a small cut on her left hand, which she could not explain. Experts believe the wound may have occurred while she was holding a knife to stab her mother. Noura said she did not tell police about the trip to the store because she did not think it was important. The police interviewed the friends who were with Noura at the party, and they stated that she left early, around midnight, and no one else saw her after that. They also mentioned that there was no beer at the event. Noura had claimed at the party that she had opened drinks and shared increasingly bizarre stories, including singing, spilling beer, getting minor injuries, rescuing a stuck cat, and burning herself while cooking. During the investigation, it was observed that Noura was wearing a warm, long-sleeved sweatshirt that nearly covered her hands, despite it being hot outside. She also had a band-aid on her hand and appeared to have wet hair, suggesting she had just showered. During the interrogation, police asked Noura why her hair was wet and why she was wearing a sweatshirt. Noura insisted she hadn't showered and that she often wore sweatshirts, even in warm weather. However, her friends disagreed, stating that she typically didn't dress that way. The police could not find the murder weapon or any bloody clothes that could link Noura to the crime at the time of the attack. They did discover drops of Jennifer's blood on the porch, indicating that the assailant had left the house with blood on them and had likely disposed of the knife elsewhere. As a result, the Noura Jackson was arrested and charged with Jennifer's murder. Bail was set at $500,000, which Noura could not afford, leaving her in prison awaiting trial, facing the possibility of life imprisonment. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Noura killed her mother due to constant conflicts over Noura's lifestyle, which included partying, skipping school, sex, and drug use. Jennifer refused to give Noura money, which angered her and prompted her to kill her mother to gain access to her assets. Witnesses spoke of a troubled relationship between the two. Jennifer's sister said that tensions had escalated a week before the murder, when Jennifer told Noura that she needed to change her lifestyle or leave the house. A friend who attended the party with Noura claimed that Noura expressed feelings of hatred toward her mother. A cousin shared that Noura asked about inheritance and life insurance, which raised suspicions. A neighbor reported that Noura had angrily demanded money from her mother just a week earlier. Additionally, evidence suggested that there was a dispute regarding the sale of her father's car. The prosecution argued that there had been a staged break-in and that phone records showed Noura was home at the time of the murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Noura had left the party early and spent about 3 hours at home before going to get a first aid kit. While Noura claimed she had been driving around town, phone records showed that she had actually been at home. She claimed that she had left her phone at home, but this was disproved when she called a friend from the store. The friend confirmed that Noura had called him at 1 a.m. on her home phone and hung up immediately. The prosecution argued that she hung up because she was afraid of being discovered after mistakenly calling from her home phone. The prosecutor pointed to inconsistencies in Noura's story, such as the sweatshirt and the cut on her hand. It was determined that she had gone to Walgreens at 4 a.m. to purchase a first aid kit for her cut, which included antiseptic and bandages. Surveillance footage from the store showed Nura asking for tissues at the counter to wipe away the blood, suggesting she had a fresh, bleeding wound. The prosecutor argued that Nura had worn the sweatshirt to cover her cut but was unsuccessful, as police had noticed the bandage on her hand. During the trial, a recording of Nura's 911 call was played. The prosecutor highlighted a peculiar moment. When asked if her mother had been shot, Nura confidently replied no, even though she was in a panic and likely couldn't tell the difference between a gunshot and a stab wound. A neighbor, whom Nura had contacted that morning, testified that he was surprised by how openly she discussed the incident. The neighbor, whom Nura had asked for help that morning, was clearly surprised to hear her talk about the situation. Nura entered her home first, seemingly unafraid, while the neighbor followed her with a gun, worried about a potential attack. This behavior aroused suspicion. The prosecutor alleged that Nura was under the influence of alcohol and illegal drugs and was motivated by a desire to make money to support her partying lifestyle. However, Nura barely spoke during the trial. Her attorney, who took the case pro bono, spoke for her most of the time. The defense argued that there was no direct evidence linking Nura to the crime. No murder weapon was found that contained her DNA or fingerprints, allowing her to be ruled out as a suspect. The lawyer accused the police of handling the investigation poorly. They found no evidence that would help identify the criminal. So the police chose to blame the troubled daughter to close the case. The lawyer argued that statistically, children rarely kill their parents, and this case differs from typical maternal murder cases. The attorney argued that the entire case was based on circumstantial evidence. Jennifer's bedroom did not contain Nura's DNA, and there was no Jennifer's blood on Nura's sweatshirt. The lawyer argued that if Nura had attacked her mother, she would have suffered much more injuries, but she only suffered one cut. The prosecutor denied this claim, saying that Jennifer did not defend herself. Instead, she was asleep at the time of the attack. Despite the defense's arguments against the investigation, the prosecutor's evidence convinced the jury, resulting in Nura Jackson being convicted of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison. After nearly 10 years, the Tennessee Supreme Court granted Nura a new trial. It was revealed that a key witness, a friend of Nura's, came forward, claiming that she had called him to her house to resolve a problem. That night, the witness had also used drugs, which may have affected his judgment, and the prosecutor was charged with withholding this information during the trial. On August 22, 2014, the Supreme Court overturned Nura's conviction, stating that this testimony was crucial to the jury's decision and that they might have ruled differently if they had known the truth. Concerns were raised about the integrity of the prosecutor, Amy Wyrick, as it became evident she had engaged in similar misconduct in other cases by concealing important facts to secure convictions. The court reprimanded her for these actions. In response, Amy stated she was prepared to retry the case and demonstrate Nura's guilt. Nura's excitement about her new trial was significantly dampened. She had new lawyers who supported her and successfully moved her case to a neighboring district court to minimize publicity and avoid involvement from prosecutor Amy. Despite this, Nura was still very anxious about the possibility of facing trial again. Ultimately, she was offered a plea bargain for a lighter sentence, which she accepted. She used a legal option called an Alford plea, where she maintained her innocence but pleaded guilty because the prosecution had enough evidence to convict her. As a result, her sentence was reduced to 15 years, and she was released early for good behavior in 2016, having served a total of 11 years in prison. During her time in prison, she experienced a worsening of a medical condition that prevents her from having children, and her criminal record makes it impossible for her to adopt. Hello again, true crime fans. we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alexis Rasmussen. Alexis Rasmussen was born in 1995 and grew up in North Ogden, Utah, a small town known for its quiet and not far from Salt Lake City. She loved dancing, reading, and spending time with her family, especially with her brother, who was her best friend. They enjoyed watching movies and chatting together for hours. Alexis was cheerful, sociable, and always smiling. She wanted to be independent and earn her own money for personal expenses. Like many teens, she decided to work as a nanny to earn some extra cash. In the spring of 2011, Alexis started searching for a part-time nanny job. She learned of a couple nearby looking for childcare help. She applied and was hired immediately after the interview. The couple, DEA and Eric Millerberg, were 38 and 36 years old, respectively. They were seen as decent and educated, attending church every Sunday. DEA worked at the hospital, and they had 2 daughters. Alexis's meeting with them went well, and they quickly built a good rapport. She started working almost daily, caring for their children while they was at work. The eldest daughter, from DEA's previous marriage, was 5 years old, and the youngest was just 9 months old. Everyone was happy. Alexis had pocket money, which she spent as she wished and even managed to save some. Eric and DEA were finally able to go to work normally and spend time together, appreciating that their children were always supervised by a young nanny. Meanwhile, Alexis's parents were pleased that their daughter was earning her own money and showing a desire to work, rather than spending time at questionable parties. Many of her friends also worked as nannies or waitresses, so this was considered normal. This thing was ideal for everyone until a tragedy occurred. On September 10, 2011, as usual, Alexis went to babysit the Millerberg family's 2 children during the day. She was supposed to return home in the evening. However, at 11:30 p.m., she called her mother, Dawn, saying that Eric and DEA had not returned from their date yet, and she would have to stay late. She asked if she could stay the night to avoid having to go home after dark. Her parents agreed, they trusting the Millerbergs as a decent family and they think nothing bad will happen. This was the last call her mother received from her daughter. In fact, Alexis' relationship with the Millerberg family was complicated. When she met Day, she quickly fell under their negative influence. Despite their respectable appearance, but they had a troubled past. Both had been convicted for distributing illegal substances, and Eric had committed other crimes. At the time of these incidents, both were on probation for another offense, but neither Alexis nor her parents were aware of this, nor did they suspect she might be in danger at their house. The Millerbergs gradually got Alexis addicted to alcohol, starting with small amounts before hosting parties where alcohol was abundant. Later, they introduced her to weed. She quickly became dependent, and soon they began paying Alexis for her childcare work not with money but with weed. From the outside, no one noticed anything wrong with Alexis. She took very little and returned home late, so her parents were unaware of her new addictions and believed she was in good hands. Unfortunately, this was not the case. On September 11, 2011, Alexis' parents were waiting for their daughter to come home. However, after she informed them the previous day that she would stay at Millerberg's house overnight, she never returned home. Her parents tried calling her, but their calls went straight to voicemail. Too worried for her daughter, her mother, Dawn, contacted all of her friends, but none of them had any information. Dawn has also been in contact with the Millerberg family, who said that she had left their home that morning and they never saw her again. Then, Dawn reported her disappearance to the police, who promptly began their investigation. Police have issued a missing persons notice for Alexis and questioned Eric and DEA, as they were the last known individuals to see Alexis. When the police arrived at the Millerberg home, Eric and DEA refused to let them inside, saying the house was untidy. They talked to the officers outside, stating that Alexis left their home around 11:30 a.m. to meet a friend, and afterward, the family went to bed and claimed to know nothing more about her whereabouts. During questioning, the officers noticed that DEA and Eric appeared to be under the influence of stimulants, which might have explained their erratic movements and overly cheerful speech. Their behavior seemed suspicious to the investigators, but without a search warrant, they were unable to inspect the house. This made them even more suspicious. The detectives speculated about whom Alexis might have planned to meet. They were aware of her boyfriend and considered that she might have gone to see him. The police came to see her boyfriend, and he said they had no plans to meet that morning. To verify this, he showed his phone and his messages with Alexis. Upon inspection, it was clear they had only exchanged brief messages shortly before she stopped communicating. The boyfriend claimed he had no idea where she could have gone or whom she was with. Detectives also spoke with Alexis' other friends and classmates, but nobody had seen her since she disappeared. It seemed like she had vanished. They all mentioned that she had no enemies. She was an ordinary teenager, with no ties to the criminal world. The possibility of her running away was dismissed because all her belongings, including money she had saved, were left at home. She had never run away before and wasn't seen as a troubled teenager. All the leads turned out to be useless. At that time, Alexis' parents were unaware of an app called Blink, which could have helped them locate she. Blink allows real-time tracking of the movements of loved ones and friends who choose to share their location. The app is designed to be secure and does not allow tracking of strangers, which prevents stalking. To track someone, you must send a request from your contact list, and they must accept it. The last time Alexis's phone worked was at Eric's house, which was the last known location of she. There was no evidence that she had left the house Millersburg that morning. Investigators started looking into Eric and DEA more closely and discovered that they had a history of distributing illegal substances, and Eric has a lot of criminal records. During the investigation, police learned that Alexis's friends knew about the true nature of the relationship between Alexis and the Millersburg family. Alexis, along with several other teenagers, including friends who had also disappeared, looked after their children. The teenagers were pleased with these working conditions because it gave them access to alcohol and substances. Multiple witnesses confirmed that DEA sold prescription drugs to Alexis, for which she received about $100. Detectives continue to question Eric and DEA, informing that they knew about illegal drug activities. Then, Eric and DEA admitted to giving drugs to teenagers, but denied any involvement in Alexis's disappearance. Despite their denial, they were arrested for distributing illegal substances and violating probation terms. They faced up to 5 years in prison. The case was further complicated because they were supplying drugs to minors. The police also reached out to Eric and DEA's friends and acquaintances for information, but everyone refused to cooperate. By this time, detectives were convinced that Eric and DEA were responsible for Alexis's disappearance. Detectives have obtained a search warrant for the Millersburg family home and conducted a search. Although they didn't find anything suspicious, they did discover a large quantity of illegal substances. Their 2 children, the eldest daughter was placed with her biological father, while the youngest child went to a foster family. A month into the investigation, a confidential informant contacted the officers by phone. He revealed that on the night of the disappearance, Alexis stayed at the Millersburg family house. She didn't leave or meet anyone the next morning. That night, Eric offered her strong substances, and she agreed to try them. Afterward, she started acting crazy and not understanding what she was doing. Eric persuaded her to engage in intimate relations. During the incident, Eric and DEA noticed that the girl was extremely disoriented and had an unusually low body temperature. DEA, who had medical training, realized she needed urgent assistance. They carried her to the bathroom and placed her in hot water to warm her up. Then, she regained consciousness and seemed to improve. She asked to be left alone to relax. Eric and DEA left the house to smoke and think about their next steps, as they were very frightened by Alexis's condition. When they returned, they noticed she was still cold. They then took her out of the water, wrapped her in a warm blanket, and placed her on the bed. They went out again for another smoke break to discuss the situation. Upon returning, they found she unconscious, with a mucus-like substance coming from her mouth. DEA, being a nurse, attempted to resuscitate her using all her skills, but it was too late, she had already died. Eric and DEA were scared, as they were on conditional early release and were on house arrest, and they did not want to go back to prison. In their panic, they sought help from friends to dispose of the body. They needed a car, which they didn't have, but everyone refused to assist, not wanting to risk jail for aiding and abetting. Desperate, they contacted another friend to borrow a car. He agreed, and they placed Alexis's body in the trunk and drove to another county. There, in a remote forest area, they hid her body. The confidential informant, Smith, reported everything to the police. Initially unaware of what was going on, he lent his car and later helped Eric and DEA move the decomposing body to a remote location. During this time, he heard all the information he shared with the police. Feeling remorse for assisting he decided to disclose everything to the investigators, who needed this information. Thanks to his tip, the police discovered the body of Alexis on October 18, 2011, 38 days after she disappeared. The victim was found in a fetal position, with her legs pulled close to her body, partially concealed in a garbage bag. Due to the body's advanced decomposition, the police could not immediately identify her. The body was in a shallow grave. A detailed forensic examination was required to confirm her identity, determine the cause of death, and the circumstances surrounding the incident. The identity of the girl, Alexis Rasmussen, was confirmed through dental records and fingerprints, exactly as predicted. Autopsy results and post-mortem analysis showed that Alexis had 7 times the lethal dose of a potent toxin in her body, which may have been the cause of death. However, there were also signs of strangulation, blunt force trauma, and stab wounds on her body. Due to the body's poor condition and advanced decomposition, it was difficult to identify all the wounds accurately, making it impossible to determine the exact cause of death. As a result, an overdose was concluded as the cause of death, but it was clear that this was not an accident. The girl had been abused. Alexis' family requested privacy during the investigation because she was a minor. A memorial service was held in her hometown of Ogden, attended by many residents. The teenager was buried on October 29. Informant, Smith, was promised immunity from charges of complicity in exchange for his cooperation. His testimony was crucial in locating the body, gathering evidence, and bringing charges, so he appeared in court only as a witness. During the trial preparation, phone records from Eric's mobile phone were reviewed. On the night Alexis disappeared, he called his friend several times, asking for help to dispose of something. CCTV footage was also examined, revealing that on September 10, 2011, between 10 and 11 p.m., DEA visited the Wall Prince Pharmacy to buy prescription drugs that induce an altered state of consciousness. Police conducted a detailed search of the Millerbird family home using luminol and found tiny blood stains. It was clear they had tried to hide what had happened by thoroughly cleaning. However, luminol can detect blood stains even after cleaning agents are used, which the criminals apparently did not know. A section of the old carpet had been cut out and discarded, leading the police to believe it had blood on it that couldn't be cleaned off. The police were puzzled about the presence of blood in the house since, according to Smith, there shouldn't have been any after an overdose. This suggested that something more violent had occurred and that Alexis likely suffered violence. Detectives then obtained a search warrant for Smith's car, which had been used to transport she. However, the car had already been sold to another district, delaying its seizure. When the car was finally located and examined, it was found that the old trunk upholstery had been removed and discarded, but microscopic blood traces remained underneath. All DNA samples collected were tested and confirmed to belong to Alexis. Smith told detectives that the incident might have been a deliberate murder. Eric and DEA may have sought to eliminate Alexis to prevent her from reporting them to the police for drug distribution and harassment. The police supported this theory, as there were indications of a premeditated crime. Initially, Eric faced charges of child abuse and drug distribution, while DEA was only charged with forging a prescription for medical drugs. After new evidence surfaced, Eric was additionally charged with first-degree murder, attempting to obstruct justice, and engaging in sexual activities with a minor. A forensic examination later revealed that Alexis' body was abused post-mortem, which constituted a criminal offense under state law. Eric and DEA was decided to be tried separately, and DEA's trial began in April 2012. She was accused of illegally obtaining a prescription for illegal substances and obstructing justice. In 2015, she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. However, by then, she had already served 3 years during the trial. She was to be sent to prison to complete her sentence. She was extremely outraged by the jury's decision. Then, she gave a heartfelt speech, expressing regret for what happened, but she did not admit guilt or involvement in Alexis' death, claiming her husband, Barrick, was responsible. She offered excuses and also expressed her deepest condolences to the Alexis family. The court deemed imprisonment appropriate for Eric and DEA's actions, distributing substances to minors, engaging in sexual intercourse, and intentionally drugging a teenager with illegal substances. Additionally, they attempted to hide the body and mislead the investigation. Notably, the body was buried twice because Eric thought the first location was not secure enough. This indicated careful planning of the crimes. DEA stated that after 3 years in prison, she realized her mistakes and wanted to reintegrate into society. She requested freedom, but no one believed her intentions were genuine. Her actions were seen as an effort to avoid more jail time, so the commission decided she should remain imprisoned. DEA was sent back to jail to serve the rest of her sentence. However, she soon became eligible for parole. While in prison, her relationship with Eric fell apart. They argued, and DEA filed for divorce, which was finalized. During his imprisonment, Eric changed the tattoo on his neck from DEA's name to Death, which was in English. This change led to disciplinary action against him. In July 2013, Eric Millerbird's trial began. By March 2014, he pleaded not guilty to all charges. He claimed that the night Alexis disappeared, she stayed with them to babysit. After returning from a date, they used substances together at her request. They all attempted to engage in sexual activity. Regarding the drug use, Eric asserted that Alexis used the substances voluntarily. During the trial, Eric's criminal history was revealed. Between 1997 and 2011, he faced multiple charges, including burglary, firearm offenses, and resisting arrest. During the trial, the front rows of the courtroom were filled with Alexis' friends and acquaintances, all visibly grieving. This hearing was particularly challenging for them as it revealed sensitive details about the life of the underage girl for the first time. Previously, her relatives were unaware that she was paid in substances by her employers for her work as a nanny. These adults had gotten her addicted. However, Eric showed no remorse for exploiting the girl. He remained jailed during the trial for providing illegal substances to minors and harassing them. This situation likely led to conflicts for Eric in prison. He was attacked by his cellmate, Simon Russell, who stabbed him around 30 times, focusing on his head and neck. He also suffered multiple defensive wounds on his hands. He was then taken to the hospital, where his condition was deemed satisfactory after receiving first aid. He survived the attack. The day after, Simon was charged with attempted murder and obstruction of justice. Eric's provocative behavior was seen as outright disrespect both in jail and in the courtroom. He not only supplied Alexis, a 16-year-old girl, with marijuana but also repeatedly attempted to have sexual relations with her. On the night of the girl's death, he assaulted her even after she had died. Eric's wife, DEA, testified against him, accusing him of committing the crime. She stated that he forced Alexis to take 3 doses of drugs and then started to harass her. When Alexis became ill, they attempted to help her, but it was too late, and she died. Despite this, Eric still engaged in sexual intercourse with her after her death. The prosecution supported this account. The prosecutor argued that Eric behaved monstrously, exploiting Alexis's trust, coercing her into consuming hard drugs, and then assaulting her by stabbing and bludgeoning her. They claimed his sexual desire was the main motive for the murder. However, Eric's lawyer contended that DEA's testimony was false, accusing her of manipulating the situation to avoid punishment and by shifting blame onto her husband. Actually, the prosecution only presented communication records from Alexis' accounts, with no evidence from DEA that Eric had given her a lethal dosage of illegal drugs. The medical examiner's report stated that the official cause of death was an overdose, despite other injuries sustained. There was no definitive proof that Alexis didn't inject the drugs herself, only witness testimonies could clarify any involvement in her drug use. However, Eric and DEA blamed each other. The defense argued that DEA's involvement in the crime was greater than she admitted and that she was equally guilty. They alleged that she urged Eric to kill Alexis and dispose of the body. The lawyers claimed Alexis's death was accidental due to an overdose. Furthermore, the defense lawyers suggested that DEA should bear significant responsibility for the incident. The prosecution argued that Eric supplied Alexis with illegal substances to harm her. She deceased also had other injuries, including head trauma from a blunt object and some fresh wounds, indicating it wasn't an accident. According to the prosecution, it was clearly murder, with Eric directly responsible for her death. They demanded the harshest possible punishment for Eric, describing him as a manipulator who first got the girl addicted to mild illegal substances and then continued to administer them for his exploitation. The trial was highly controversial, with an uncertain outcome until sentencing. Eric advised his lawyers to agree to let him take some responsibility. He believed it was only fair to admit his role in what happened and apologize to Alexis' family, hoping to receive a lighter sentence. However, he denied committing deliberate murder. He claimed he did not inject she with psychoactive substances, attributing this action to DEA. Surveillance footage showed that DEA went to the pharmacy for prescription drugs and forged prescriptions. Despite this evidence, Alexis' relatives believed Eric was the main culprit and urged the judge to impose the maximum sentence. They wanted a life sentence without parole to ensure he would never be released. The court found him guilty of all charges, including first-degree murder, and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 6 years. DEA applied for parole 3 times. Her first applications in 2015 and 2017 were rejected. However, in 2018, her application was approved because she completed addiction recovery courses and a culinary business program to help her reintegrate into society. She was released on October 16, 2018. Eric became eligible for parole in 2018 and applied for release, but his request was denied, and he remains in prison. Alexis' family hopes he will never be released. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Eapen. Sunil and Deborah got married in 1990 after meeting in medical college. Sunil, from Chicago, USA, followed his father's path and became an anesthesiologist, while Deborah worked as an ophthalmologist. Their first child, Brendan, was born in 1994, and their second child, Matthew, born May 24, 1996. They are young parents working in the medical field. They face significant challenges balancing their careers and family life. Both came from respected families with successful backgrounds in education and medicine, motivating them to achieve similar success. They lived in a prestigious area of Boston, Massachusetts, in a lovely home and were financially comfortable enough to hire a nanny. The nanny became like a family member, handling both childcare and household duties, and lived on their property. Deborah soon returned to work part-time, having completed advanced training courses during her pregnancy. Balancing her professional responsibilities with family care was difficult and stressful. The high workload placed on the nannies often led to them leaving due to stress or being dismissed if they couldn't meet the family's expectations. Before hiring 18-year-old Louise Woodward from Cheshire, Great Britain, they used to employ 3 other nannies. Louise lived with her family until she turned 18, then decided to take a gap year in the United States before continuing her education. Although she didn't have formal training, she loved children and got along well with them. She registered as a nanny and housekeeper with a recruiting agency, which helped her move to Boston and find a job. In December 1996, she started working for the Sunil family, whose youngest child, Matthew, was only 8 months old. She had no prior experience with infants, including changing diapers, and had only 3 days of training before she began her job. Louise was given the responsibility of caring for Matthew and 2 years old, Brendan, and assisting with household chores. She quickly found the workload overwhelming due to the family's busy daily routine. All this workload went against Louise's plans, as she had come to the USA seeking adventure and enjoyment, not to work without any days off. She initially thought that being a nanny would provide her with a livelihood without much responsibility. However, looking after children aged 8 months and 2 years truly requires experience, training, and a sense of responsibility. It is challenging to expect an 18-year-old to have such expertise without proper training. Despite this, Sunil and Deborah, who were desperate for help, accepted Louise since they needed a nanny housekeeper. Furthermore, her services were affordable. However, Louise's behavior did not meet the family's high standards, so they gave her a list of rules to follow. As a young nanny, she had little choice because previous failures with other families had put her at risk of being dismissed by the agency. She needed to keep her job to maintain her income. It was challenging for her to suppress her youthful, free spirit, as she preferred to walk, chat with friends, and attend parties rather than focus on work. Occasionally, she would wander around Boston and indulge in her dreams. However, she started refusing work more often, frequently asking for time off, and spending a lot of time on herself. She began taking daily walks, returning late in the evening, regularly attending parties, and struggling to wake up in the morning, often sleeping until nearly lunchtime. This behavior disappointed the Eapens, as she would spend hours chatting with her family in the UK, neglecting her responsibilities with the children. One day, Deborah came home from work earlier than usual and found the children sleeping at home alone without any supervision. Later, the nanny Louise returned from a party. There were suspicions that similar incidents had occurred before. Naturally, Sunil and Deborah felt worried about their children and they were not happy with her. They spoke to her and imposed a curfew, but it didn't solve the problem. They were very unhappy with her behavior and felt they weren't getting their money's worth for services. Although they still wanted to trust her, they saw her as lazy and irresponsible. So, the relationship which she began to significantly deteriorate a few days before the unfortunate incident. She openly told Sunil that she didn't enjoy being a nanny and didn't want children because it was difficult, yet she pleaded not to be fired because she desperately needed the job. Sunil made more rules to discipline her, to get the nanny at the level they desired. On February 3, 1997, Deborah informed Louise that she could leave if anything was not to her liking. However, Louise, the nanny, resisted the idea, insisting there was no need to rush and that she was willing to accept and adhere to their new, stricter conditions. They agreed but mentioned they needed to change the children's sleep schedule by limiting sleep after 3 p.m. to prevent disrupting their nighttime rest. This change was not aimed at Louise personally but was necessary to reorganize the children's daily routine. Shortly after this, a terrible tragedy occurred. The tragedy happened just 10 weeks after Louise began her job. On February 4, 1997, Louise woke the children up in the morning after the parents left for work. She mentioned that Matthew was unusually fussy and cried a lot from the start of the day. Louise bathed him and then put him back to bed to calm him down. At 3:15 p.m., she went to wake him up from his nap and noticed he was breathing weakly and irregularly. She took him to the living room to perform CPR, but he remained unconscious. Initially, she couldn't reach Sunil and Deborah and only called 911 at 3:45 p.m. to report that Matthew, the 8-month-old, was not breathing. Louise informed the coordinator that the baby might have choked on vomit because his face was turning blue. Emergency services arrived quickly. The child was alive but in critical condition. The doctors rushed him to the children's hospital, where they found that Matthew had much more severe injuries than initially reported. Matthew, an 8-month-old baby, was found to have a 10-centimeter crack at the base of his skull, bleeding in his eyes, a hematoma between the skull and brain, and bleeding in his neck and back of the brain. He also had a broken wrist, and vomit was found in his trachea. He was urgently taken to the operating room for brain surgery and connected him to a life support machine because he was in a coma. Experienced doctors suggested that these injuries were caused by being violently shaken and hit on the head. In pediatrics, this is known as shaken baby syndrome. Babies are born with disproportionately large heads and weak neck muscles, making them vulnerable to injury when shaken. The unfixed head will dangle when shaken, causing damage to brain cell membranes and brain injury. When a baby is shaken, the brain moves back and forth inside the skull, leading to swelling and bleeding. Adults often shake babies out of frustration when they cry, not realizing it won't calm them down but will make them cry more. Continued shaking can cause severe injuries or even be fatal. Most cases occur in children up to 2 years old, but even a 4-year-old can suffer greatly from such shaking. Around 4 p.m., Deborah, Matthew's mother, noticed she had missed a call from Louise at 3:15 p.m. and also saw an urgent text message from she. Concerned, she left her patient at the hospital and called she, who explained the situation. Deborah was furious. She asked for leave from work and rushed to the hospital where Matthew was admitted. On the way, she prayed that her son would be okay. Upon arrival, she informed the doctors of her medical expertise, as she was an ophthalmologist, and asked to examine her baby. She quickly discovered severe Matthew's eye hemorrhaging. Meanwhile, the doctors alerted the police about the baby's serious injuries, prompting law enforcement to visit the Eapen family home to question the nanny. Louise was at home, looking upset and concerned, with Brendan. She explained that Matthew had been irritable and difficult since the morning, and despite her efforts to calm him, nothing worked. By the end of the conversation, she confessed to possibly being a bit harsh with him. Overwhelmed by his continuous crying and screaming, she shook him to try to soothe him, but it was ineffective. In frustration, she threw him onto a pile of towels on the bed. While taking him to the bathroom, she accidentally dropped him, which caused him to hit his head on the floor. Her account was alarming, given the severity of Matthew's injuries. The following day, the police arrested Louise on charges of assaulting a child. Matthew's condition was not improving, and doctors were sure he had no hope of recovery. The brain injury was so severe that, even if he survived, he would be paralyzed for life. Sunil and Deborah, who were also medically educated, understood this. On February 9, 1997, they made the difficult decision to disconnect Matthew from life support, worsening Louise's situation as she was accused of murder. She was denied bail before the trial, but continued to insist on her innocence, maintaining it was a tragic accident. Before the trial on May 7, 1997, Louise agreed to take a polygraph test. During the test, she was asked if she had caused physical harm to Matthew on that day. She denied causing any injury, and a lie detector expert concluded her answers were truthful with 95% confidence. Another expert, hired by her lawyers, also confirmed that she answered all questions truthfully. On October 7, 1997, a trial began in Cambridge, Massachusetts, involving many medical experts, including neurosurgeons, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, and pathologists, all of whom were familiar with similar crimes. In the courtroom, there was extensive discussion about Matthew's injuries and Louise's behavior. Most experts believed that his injuries were caused by abuse and violence. Many doubted Louise's statement that she had accidentally hit the boy's head, noting that the injuries showed signs of blunt force trauma. The child had probably been severely and brutally beaten, and the injuries appeared fresh. An expert for the prosecution initially compared Matthew's injury to those from a fall from the second floor, but this statement was later withdrawn. The defense argued that Matthew's head and wrist injuries occurred weeks prior to the incident, before the nanny was in their home. The lawyers suggested that the child's parents, Sunil and Deborah, could have been involved in neglect or abuse. In court, Louise stated that she had not noticed any injuries to Matthew's head or arm. She explained that her interaction with the child was mild, but it caused the reopening of an old injury, leading to bleeding. She mentioned that the day before the tragic incident, the child fell near the stairs and hurt himself, which might have aggravated the injury. Louise clarified that her use of British English was misunderstood. When she said popped, she meant she placed the child on the bed, not through him, as might be interpreted in American English, and she denied dropping the baby in the bathtub. The defense argued that if the prosecution's claim of cruel treatment were true, Matthew would have had serious bruises and hematomas on the head and body, which were not present. This suggests that the child might have been shaken to calm him down, but not to the extent the prosecution claimed. Louise, in an emotional outburst, lost control and shook the child, causing old injuries to resurface. Witnesses and experts testified that there was no fresh bleeding in the brain, indicating that the skull fracture was an older injury. However, Sunil and Deborah denied that Matthew had suffered such a traumatic brain injury. The defense suggested that these actions might have been driven by fear, as Louise panicked while trying to revive the child. Unfortunately, Brendan could not testify at the trial because he was too young to understand what had happened. During the trial, Louise acted inappropriately. She occasionally smirked and laughed, which was attributed to nervous shock. At the time, she was reportedly only 18 years old, and the incident described triggered such a reaction. Additionally, she retracted her initial testimony obtained by detectives during the first interview. She did not mention how challenging it was to work for the Eapen family, who overwhelmed her with childcare and household duties, for which she was unprepared. She had come to the United States to relax and have fun. Despite this, she insisted that she never mistreated the children. She claimed she would never harm a child, especially to the extent of causing serious injuries that led to a coma and could paralyze an 8-month-old baby. Louise's relatives from the UK spoke at the trial, praising her as a gentle and reserved person, They described her as an obedient parishioner of a local church, a vegetarian, and a clarinet player. However, her friends from the US had a different view, seeing her as a party girl who never missed a chance to go out. 3 of her friends testified at the trial, as well as former employers who had let her go due to incompetence and irresponsibility. The prosecution highlighted that she tried to wake Matthew 15 to 20 times but found the boy wasn't breathing. She attempted to help him and called his parents, but they didn't answer. It took her half an hour to finally call 911. The prosecutor questioned why she delayed calling for emergency help when immediate action was needed. She explained that she was panicking and stressed, trying hard to manage the situation on her own. Throughout the trial, Louise showed little emotion. She occasionally smiled but never expressed regret for what happened. She spoke fondly of Brendan and Matthew, she describing Brendan as smart and talkative, and Matthew as a sweet, smiling, and playful child. The trial was broadcast live on British television, capturing the attention of almost the entire country, with many people supporting she. On October 30, 1997, a jury found Louise Woodward guilty of second-degree murder. She begged the judge to lighten her sentence. She begged them not to let her spend the rest of her life in prison for something she didn't do. However, the judge ignored her pleas. Louise was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Upon hearing the sentence, she burst into tears, unable to believe what was happening. She questioned the judge, insisting that she hadn't done anything wrong and sincerely hoped for an acquittal. Her mother supported her, stating in court that a terrible judicial error had occurred. She argued that her daughter could not have harmed a defenseless child and that she was innocent and did not deserve such a harsh punishment. In fact, the jury's opinions were mixed. Many people believe that Louise is innocent in Matthew's death, attributing it to an old injury. However, after further deliberation, the jury concluded she was guilty. It later emerged that those who initially supported acquittal were persuaded to vote guilty. This thing sparked significant public outcry in both the United States and Louise's home country, Britain. Many people in the UK donated funds to assist Louise and her family, totaling about $500,000. Additionally, there were mass protests from supporters who believed Louise was an innocent victim of the US legal system. This public pressure led to the conviction being overturned by the judge 10 days later. By then, Louise had already spent about 8 months in prison. After reviewing the case materials, the new judge concluded that Louise's actions were due to her inexperience and immaturity, not malicious intent, and that murder was not her purpose. Louise was sentenced to the time she had already spent in prison awaiting trial, which was 289 days, allowing her to be immediately released. Her supporters celebrated her release like a holiday. Meanwhile, the death of Matthew, the 8-month-old child, was largely overlooked. Even if his death wasn't her fault, his parents sought justice for their child, and the prosecutor was determined to see Louise imprisoned for a longer period. He noted that he had recently been involved in a trial where a father was accused of killing a child in a similar case, and that father remained in prison. He questioned why Louise, a nanny, was released, viewing it as unfair and contradictory given the prevalence of similar cases in U.S. judicial practice. Louise was released from prison after serving less time than it took. She returned to her hometown in the UK in 1998 and enrolled in the Faculty of Law at London South Bank University. She explained that her interest in law developed during the trial, as she engaged deeply with legal matters to better understand the proceedings. Thus, choosing law as a profession felt natural and obvious to her. While pursuing her studies, Louise decided to fulfill another dream, learning to dance. She took salsa lessons and later opened her own dance school, becoming a dance instructor. Her classes included children, often accompanied by their mothers, who were comfortable with her past and aware of the accusations against her. In 2002, Louise graduated with honors from university and began working as a lawyer. However, a year later, she left her law firm to return to her dance studio. She then married businessman Anthony Elkis, who worked in cargo transportation, and they had a daughter. By 2014, Louise had authored several books and participated in numerous interviews about past incident. In all interviews, she has insisted that she was wrongly accused of Matthew's death. She insisted she had no intention to harm and believed her arrest was unjust. She remarked that the U.S. judicial system often demands accountability, suggesting that if the parents weren't blamed, the suspicion fell on her. Still, she expressed relief and gratitude that the judicial system ultimately resolved the case, leading to her release. Louise, now 45 years old, continues to live a normal life without feeling guilty about the past, and many people support her in this. In one of her interviews, she stated that she had the right to enjoy her life. Meanwhile, the parents of Matthew, Deborah, and Sunil faced public outrage. People criticized them for prioritizing their careers over spending time with their children, questioning why they hired an inexperienced young nanny who was not equipped to care for small children. Despite knowing this, they were attracted because the cost of hiring her would be very low and burdened her with excessive responsibilities. The 18-year-old nanny, Louise, received only 3 days of training before being overwhelmed with numerous restrictions and rules. Due to public pressure, the Eapen family had to relocate to a new, undisclosed address. It is known that they now have 2 more children and no longer hire nannies, with Deborah taking on the responsibility of raising the children herself. They established the Matthew Eapen Foundation at Boston Children's Hospital to enhance child safety and well-being by educating the public about the dangers of shaking a baby and providing support to victims and their families. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Gabby Doolin. Gabby Doolin was born on December 26, 2007, in Scottsville, Kentucky, a small town with a population of just over 4,000. In Scottsville, most people know each other or know someone in every family. Like many small towns, here there are very few types of entertainment. Locals primarily focused on school sports, especially football. The local school had good fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where they frequently held games and competitions. Participating in these activities has become a tradition for locals, especially when their children participate. Gabby's family was typical. Her parents had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The oldest son was a member of the school football team, while Gabby participated in cheerleading. In November 2015, when Gabby was 7 years old, their town was preparing for the biggest football game of the year. Their school team was about to compete against a team from another county. And everyone was excited for this contest. Although Gabby's older brother played on the team, but she liked playing with other children more than playing games. Gabby's parents originally intended to leave her at home with their youngest son, cared for by a relative. However, Gabby convinced them to let her join them. On the evening of November 14th, they went to the school field for a game. In addition to local people, many people from a neighboring county came to support their team. Once they arrived at the stadium, Gabby saw her friends and asked her mom if she could play with them. Her mom agreed but reminded her to stay on school grounds and stick with the other kids. After that, her mom went to the bleachers, while she ran off to meet her friends. Gabby ran back and forth to her mom a few times. After that, she ran away to play again. At one point, she visited her dad, who was in the announcement room, and asked him for some money to buy snacks at the concession stand, then she running off again. Minutes later, Gabby's friends approached her mom in the bleachers, looking worried. Her mom noticed Gabby was not with them and asked what was wrong. The girls explained they had decided to play hide and seek, and Gabby was to find them. They had hidden in the restroom, but time passed, and Gabby never found them. Thinking they had won, the girls left their hiding spot to find Gabby, but she was nowhere to be seen. They called her name and checked all the places they had been playing earlier, but Gabby had seemingly disappeared. They then remembered that Gabby might have gone to the bleachers to find her mom, so they rushed there. Gabby's mother panicked when she discovered her daughter was missing and quickly informed her husband. He hurried off to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother headed to the concession stand, where Gabby had wanted to buy snacks, to continue her search. While searching, the parents' Gabby's encountered friends and shared the news about their daughter's disappearance. Concerned, their friends joined in a search for Gabby. They thoroughly searched the area around the stadium but found no trace of Gabby. Returning to the stadium, the parents' Gabby's made an announcement over the loudspeakers in hopes that she would hear it, but there was still no sign of her. As the game paused and spectators returned to their seats, they continued to ask people if they had seen Gabby, and some offered to help search as well. They went out again to search the area around the stadium and asked the staff to turn on flashlights around the baseball field, which led to a small forest. They walked through the forest but still couldn't find Gabby. By this time, about 20 minutes had passed since she disappeared, and the parents decided to call the police. Officers quickly arrived at the scene, listened to the accounts from the parents and Gabby's friends, and they began their search. The local police department had little experience with serious cases like this, as child disappearances were rare in their small town. The officers immediately considered the worst-case scenario, that Gabby may have been abducted or harmed. The officers encountered a pressing issue: the suspected kidnapper was likely at the stadium, where a game was about to conclude. Realizing they had limited time before fans started leaving, which may include suspects, they decided to stop the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside. Police kept watch at all exits to stop anyone from fleeing. They decided not to inform people about the situation, to avoid causing panic, so as not to hinder their search. If people became aware that a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl might be nearby, it could lead to chaos. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and began searching the surrounding area. They moved toward the baseball field and entered the woods. Deeper into the trees, they discovered a small creek where they found the body of a girl, later identified as Gabby. They called for an ambulance to transport her body to the medical examiner. A preliminary examination indicated asphyxiation due to visible marks on her neck. Furthermore, part of Gabby's clothes were also missing, making the police suspect that she had been sexually assaulted. Gabby's mother saw an ambulance near the woods and immediately thought that her daughter had been found in need of medical attention. She rushed to the scene, but was stopped by the police, who didn't want her to witness the disturbing scene they were dealing with. The police investigation had quickly turned into a murder case, so they decided to relocate everyone from the stadium to the school gym. The investigators suspected that the killer might be among the group, and they needed to identify the perpetrator as soon as possible. The investigators then informed Gabby's parents about the likely circumstances of her death. They inquired if the parents had any suspicions about the person responsible for this heinous act. Specifically, they inquired if anyone had made threats against the family or if the parents had noticed anything unusual. However, Gabby's parents stated they had no idea who could be behind this act. Then, detectives interviewing Gabby's friends to see if they had noticed anything unusual that evening. They asked if anyone had been following or watching them, but the girls didn't remember anything suspicious. Detectives also brought Gabby's friends to the gym and asked them to carefully observe the people present, hoping to trigger their memory. Unfortunately, this effort did not yield any significant leads. The lead detective persisted in his belief that Gabby's friends may have unknowingly seen the kidnapper. He suspected that they might have been hesitant to point him out due to fear. To aid their recall, he encouraged them to remember every detail from that evening. Eventually, One of Gabby's friends mentioned that when she hid from Gabby in the restroom, she saw a man near the door. Although the girl's memory of the man's appearance was limited, she recalled that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police spoke to the ticket vendor, who confirmed seeing a man with a denim jacket draped. The vendor found this person's behavior unusual and suspected he was intoxicated. Although this new information helped, the police still couldn't identify the man. The police started questioning the people who had been at the game. As they did, it became clear why they were all being held there. They grew concerned, particularly for the safety of their children. Despite their fear, they cooperated with the police and answered their questions. To further investigate, the police cross-referenced the names of men present in the gym against a sex offenders registry, but found no matches. They also checked on sex offenders who had lived near the school, verifying their whereabouts at the time of the incident, but all of them had alibis. None of them had been near the school at the time of the incident. Several witnesses reported that they saw a man named Timothy Madden. He acting strangely near the women's restroom during the game. As a local resident, many people were familiar with him, but they stated that his behavior that evening seemed suspicious. According to these witnesses, Madden was wearing a denim jacket, which matches the description provided by one of Gabby's friends, who also saw a man near the restroom. A witness who was a distant relative of Timothy reported that during the game, Timothy seemed distracted. Despite his younger son playing on the field, Timothy, who normally showed great interest in his son's sports activities, wasn't paying attention. Several other witnesses also expressed concerns about Timothy's unusual behavior, leading investigators to interrogate him. As night fell, many people had been released from the school. Before speaking with Timothy, investigators sought the local sheriff's opinion. The sheriff, who had known Timothy, doubted he was capable of committing such a crime. Timothy lived with his wife and 5 children. When police went to speak with him, they knocked on his door, and he answered. The officers asked if he knew the reason for their visit, and Timothy stated he was aware of Gabby's murder, but had no involvement in it. The detectives then used a tactic to gather more information. They asked Timothy if he could explain why several eyewitnesses claimed to have recorded him talking to Gabby shortly before her murder, through videos they supposedly provided. However, the detectives had fabricated this information. Their intention was to provoke Timothy into revealing his guilt or new information if he was involved in the crime. Timothy initially claimed he had no knowledge of the events, but he quickly changed his story. He admitted to speaking to Gabby near the stadium that evening. According to Timothy, he had stepped outside to smoke when several girls ran by him. Shortly after, Gabby approached and asked if he had seen her friends, explaining they were playing hide-and-seek and she couldn't find them. Timothy directed her towards their location, and she ran off. The detectives found Timothy's rapid change in story suspicious. Furthermore, his account indicated that he had spoken to Gabby just minutes before her disappearance. Notably, at the time when they met near the stadium, there were no witnesses present, which could have provided Timothy with an opportunity to commit the crime. The detectives then inquired if Timothy could provide a reasonable explanation if his DNA was found on Gabby's body. He replied calmly that he had none. They also requested a DNA sample from Timothy and the clothing he wore at the stadium. Timothy agreed to both requests. However, when handing over his clothing to the police, they discovered suspicious stains on the pants, denim jacket, and underwear that resembled blood. When questioned about the stains, Timothy insisted they were just dirt and denied any wrongdoing. However, the police were skeptical and decided to wait for the DNA analysis results to proceed with an arrest. After several days, the forensic pathologist completed the examination of the victim's body, confirming that Gabby's cause of death was manual strangulation. The pathologist also determined that she had been brutally assaulted. A biological sample of the perpetrator was extracted and sent to the laboratory for further analysis. The day after the murder, something unexpected happened. An anonymous letter arrived at the police station, claiming a suspicious person had been seen at the game. The letter provided a detailed description of the person's car, including the make and license plate number. This allowed investigators to quickly track down the vehicle's owner, who was a student living about 30 minutes from Scottsville. When questioned by the police, the student denied attending the game and knowing about the murder. He claimed to have been at work that evening, and the police were able to verify his alibi. As a result, he was removed from the list of suspects. Despite this, the person who wrote the anonymous letter was never identified. It is unclear whether the letter was intended as a trap or a cruel joke, but it is clear that the student was innocent. Police quickly received additional clues. Several people reported suspicious behavior by a 16-year-old local boy. He had given conflicting accounts of his whereabouts on the day of the game, claiming both to have been there and not to have attended. He also mentioned seeing girls playing hide and seek. The detectives discovered that the boy was Timothy Madden's son. However, what they found even more alarming was that the boy had threatened his father with a knife just 2 weeks before the murder. The police wanted to question the boy further but needed his parents to be present. However, his mother refused to cooperate and wouldn't provide a DNA sample, leaving the police without any concrete evidence. As news of the police investigation into the Timothy family spread, rumors began circulating in the small town of Scottsville. Some speculated that one of Timothy's older sons could be a suspect, while others suspected Timothy himself. Gabby's parents were shocked to hear these rumors, especially since they had known Timothy Madden since childhood and were close to his family. Their children played on the same sports teams, and they would often sit together at games. Given their long-standing friendship, Gabby's parents found it difficult to imagine that anyone from their social circle could be connected to the murder. Following the spread of rumors in town, another incident occurred. The 20-year-old eldest son of the Timothy family began sending text messages to the police. He using profanity and issuing threats, insisting police stop bothering his family. He then was promptly arrested for making these threats. Further investigation revealed that there was an outstanding arrest warrant for him in another town, related to allegations of assaulting a minor. During questioning, the young man attributed his behavior to frustration over the accusations against his family. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming he was at his cousin's house in a neighboring town on the evening in question. He consented to providing a DNA sample, which was then sent to the lab for analysis. On November 20th, 6 days after Gabby's murder, her funeral was held, drawing hundreds of mourners from Scottsville and surrounding towns. Everyone came together to support Gabby's parents, donating to help cover the funeral expenses. Meanwhile, the lab finished analyzing the DNA evidence, comparing it to samples from Timothy and his son. The results were conclusive. The semen on Gabby's body matched Timothy Madden's DNA, and the blood on his clothes matched Gabby's DNA. Detectives attended the funeral and discreetly informed Gabby's parents about this. At the same time, police officers arrived at Timothy's house and took him into custody. However, Timothy still maintains that he is innocent. He said the blood on his clothes was his own, the result of a scratch from a fence. This contradicted his initial testimony to police, in which he had claimed the stain was mud. With the DNA evidence in hand, the prosecution took the case to court, seeking the death penalty. During trial preparation, Timothy's lawyer maintained his client's innocence. He raised concerns about the reliability of the evidence, citing inconsistencies in the timeline. Specifically, the lawyer argued that Timothy was at the stadium filming a game at the time of the murder. However, Timothy himself had previously told police that he saw Gabby around the same time. The lawyer highlighted that Gabby's body was discovered in a creek, yet when Timothy returned to the stadium, his clothes were dry. Additionally, Timothy's mother, who resided with him, reported that when Timothy came home, he was wearing clean clothes, didn't look troubled, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution argued that the discovery of Timothy's semen on Gabby's body made all of the defense's arguments meaningless. This evidence firmly established that Timothy was involved in the case. According to police, his account of that evening contained some truth. It is possible that Timothy did leave the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was searching for her friends. Given that Timothy was the father of one of Gabby's friends, she would have been familiar with him. Gabby may have approached Timothy to ask about the whereabouts of the other girls. At this point, Timothy might have concocted a plan, telling Gabby that the girls had gone into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to take her there. Once they were far enough from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her, then go back to the match. The wait for Timothy's trial had been ongoing for 4 years, causing distress for Gabby's family. They were anxious for justice to be served and for the person responsible for the murder to be held accountable. However, the case was slowed down due to many administrative procedures, leaving the family frustrated and having to wait for many years. In 2019, the prosecution and defense started negotiating a plea deal. The prosecution proposed waiving the death penalty if Timothy pleaded guilty and accepted a life sentence. Gabby's parents supported this proposal, as the prolonged wait for the trial was taking a toll on them. They also wanted to avoid the emotional pain of attending multiple hearings. Although Timothy had consistently maintained his innocence, he eventually agreed to the plea deal and confessed. However, the terms of the agreement did not require him to disclose the details of his actions, he only had to admit his guilt. This was unsatisfactory for Gabby's family, as they wanted the perpetrator to take full responsibility for his crimes and provide a complete account of what happened to their daughter. The court hearing became heated, Gabby's father yelling at Timothy and Timothy's relatives shouting at Gabby's family. The judge was forced to intervene, calling a break and separating the parties. Ultimately, Timothy was sentenced to life in a maximum security prison.